Hey, folks, welcome back to the show. Happy Wednesday. Hope everybody's doing well. This is my last regularly scheduled Wednesday show, and what better way to sort of end the run, if you will, but to have an amazing guitar instructor, personally my favorite on YouTube, Steve Stine, who's even before he came on, I was getting comments. Oh, I've learned so much from him. I've learned so much from him. He's just got a way to take very complicated topics and make them simple enough that people like me can understand. And he's probably the busiest guy on YouTube. So without further ado, let me bring him in. Hey, Steve, how are you?
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Busy, man. Busiest man on YouTube.
Yeah, it's a never-ending grind, but I love it all.
I got like I teach for a living too, and one thing that always you know amazes me about you is you're always so enthusiastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is you save the I was just telling you how today it's been an exhausting about 6 weeks. It's just nonstop grind of so many things going on, and I'm exhausted, but that doesn't mean I can't put a smile on my face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it seems like you've got. I mean, you're super busy with Guitar Zoom. I was mentioning to you off air. I just purchased the course, and I would recommend to anybody. I mean, those Guitar Zoom courses are fantastic. I think this is my third one
Thank
that I
you.
bought from you, and one thing. Let me say this. So being a teacher as well, I really appreciate this. The fact that you can take, stuff that could be a very complicated subject and bring it down to a point where, somebody like myself or, somebody who isn't previously schooled in music and theory can understand and latch to and use right away.
That's what it's about.
You know, it's not like abstract things like, let's get out a pen and paper and, write down a bunch of things and then maybe one day you'll use them. It's like you learn it and you can incorporate it into your playing. So that's really, really cool. Really,
Yeah,
really.
I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I've always just found it incredibly important to keep people motivated and learning things that are kind of within their zone, within their space that feels good, that makes them feel good. It's like we were talking about a little bit beforehand. It's so easy now with social media to get so caught up in competition and just with people never feeling like they're good enough, and none of those things could be further from the truth. It's just finding your voice on the guitar, which is really the most important thing. Otherwise, why do it? Why do it if it's just making you frustrated? And we all get frustrated. I get frustrated all the time.
Yeah.
But if that's all it is frustrating, you're not going to ever have any joy or success with it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, not everybody's going to be able to sweep pick. Like I could live to be 100 and I'll never be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't make music and find other things that you can actually do, and keep maintain your interest in the instrument. Right.
I don't know if we talked about this last time, but there's a great interview with George Lynch. I don't remember what video it's from, and I really do wish I had it. If anybody out there knows the link to the video I'm talking about, it would be great. But George is talking about how when all these up and coming shredders started hitting the scene, he started trying to change his technique, like because he was very legato playing, all the things that he does. That's very cool,
Right.
slidey things and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, all these players came out that were very articulate in their picking and things like that. So he's like, God, I got to learn how to do that. And he sat there and he said he was trying to learn how to do all this stuff, and he couldn't do it. Like he couldn't do it like they do it. And then finally, at some point, he realized that he's George Lynch. Like,
Yeah.
right? He does it the way he does it. And then he went, and then I stopped trying to be somebody, I stopped trying to be somebody I'm not. And I always thought that was a really impactful interview because it's the truth. We all go through these things where we go, oh, now I got to learn how to sweep pick, or now I got to learn how to hybrid pick. And it's great if you want to. I think that's wonderful. But you don't have to throw away all the good things that make you you just because you have to try and be the next thing for 2021 or 2022 or whatever. If you got good stuff, you got good stuff, you know?
Yeah, you got to find your strengths and just kind of pursue that, and yeah, stop hitting your head against the wall.
Yep.
So, folks, while we're chatting here, if anyone has any questions for Steve, I mean, here, take advantage. We've got the premier YouTube instructional guitar teacher here. Make sure, if you've got any questions, now's the time to bring them up. Cool. All right. So, we got a few people. Let me just say hello to a few people we got in here. Mitch Heyman is with us. Charles Green, welcome. Thunder Falcon. Sandra's with us. Welcome, Sandra. Blackjack Guitar. Sean Zimmerman. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming and checking out the show today. So, let me ask you this while we're waiting for some questions to come up. So, I was mentioning to you, I bought the melodic soloing course, and you talk about using pentatonics, full diatonics, and then trying to incorporate arpeggios in there as well, and just sort of blending them and being able to see them. The way I play, and at this point it's laziness, is I really rely a lot on my ear. So what I mean by that is I'll know, if I'm playing something in a key, I'll know from patterns where all the notes are.
Sure.
Right. And then when I'm soloing, and then when I learn these, the arpeggios, for me, it'll be just more patterns to sort of learn.
Mm-hmm.
But is it correct, or is it a good way to kind of, rely on my ear as opposed to like think in terms of, well, you want to hit that note as the third, or that sounds good because that's the sixth, or, is it worth it to kind of analyze it further and go at it at that perspective? Or,
I mean, I think everybody's different, but I would answer that I think both approaches can be beneficial, right? I mean, if you're relying solely on your ear, now again, please understand, as much as I love theory, I try and be very careful when it comes to theoretical concepts, because theory can be something which is exactly that, a theory. It's a concept that we can understand, but if we can't apply it practically in our daily playing, it's something interesting to talk about, but it might not be very useful, right? So we have to be careful when we talk about theory. But on the other side, if we're just talking about playing by ear, for instance, or we're letting our ear lead us, which I do too, don't get me wrong, I think most players do. But if that's all we have, and we don't understand that there's a logical connection, instead of saying theory, let's just say a natural connection, 2 + 2 = 4, right?
right.
If we understand that natural connection, we can anticipate that this next chord is coming, and we have some options of things, as opposed to what I tell people a lot with playing by ear is, and again, don't get me wrong, I play by ear too, in terms of trying to find melodies and things that are happening, but it's happening in real time. So you can't anticipate, you can't forward think with that. It's got to be happening in real time. And then what happens with that is there's opportunity for it to not work as well as you want it to at times, because maybe you're not feeling it. Maybe it's a chord progression you're not quite as comfortable with, or a key that you're not as comfortable with, or a groove that you might be uncomfortable with. Well, now that changes everything about that. And so what we sometimes will do then is we will kind of limit ourselves because those things didn't feel good or they didn't turn out as well. So we're not doing those. We're just going to stick with these things because this is where our comfort is, you see?
Right.
So that's the only thing I would say with that is you have to be a little bit careful with that, where having some, even if you think about it like this, if you were playing in the key of C major, right? So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And we have the chords C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished, right? So we got our 1, 4, 5, which is major, and our 2, 3, 6, which is minor, and our 7, which is diminished. And that's what a major scale is.
Right.
So if that C chord is being played, we know we can play a C major arpeggio or triad or whatever you want to call it, playing that C and G. But we could play a D minor arpeggio or an E minor arpeggio or an F major arpeggio or a G major arpeggio over that C chord. We could play any of those arpeggios or those triads, however you want to think about it, over that chord. And they're all going to sound colorful and they're all going to sound unique. They're going to sound different from each other. Where people think, well, if it's C major, I only have C major. Or maybe I have A minor because it's the relative minor. Well, you don't. You could play a D minor over that C major. The difference is you're still going to have to find a way to tie it in logistically to make it feel like it's still part of the C major element, right? So you might take that D minor, which is D, F, and A, and then decide after the A, you're going to make it a D minor 7, you're going to head over to that C. Or a D minor 9, you're going to head from C to E. Well, now all of a sudden, it starts feeling more like it's connected to that C chord. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming thinking about it like that. You might just take that one thing and look at it. Or even if you weren't even thinking theory and you just took the D minor arpeggio and you played it on the guitar, but you were seeing the C, for instance, the C chord, the C cage chord system sitting right there. Mm-hmm. You might make that D minor chord or that D minor arpeggio and then move into the C major scale at the same time you're playing that D minor arpeggio. I mean, these are just hypotheticals, but that's one thing I love to do, or things like that.
No, that's a really good point because, when I say learn arpeggios and this and that, and it's putting it together and making it sound smooth.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like, oh, he's playing an arpeggio now. Oh, now he's going to jump over to this.
Absolutely.
Make it sound cohesive and smooth. Here's a first question. This is from Absolute Mayhem. Welcome, man. I haven't seen you in a while. Hope you're doing well. Questions for Steve. What is your most viewed video? Also, the most common topic that you teach.
I think the most viewed video, I haven't checked it a while, but I think the most viewed one is probably that learn to play guitar or learn to solo in 5 minutes. I think it's got like 10 million views now, something like that. And what was the second question?
The topic that you teach the most.
I think people are most intrigued by modes. I think people like to talk about modes a lot, or trying to make solos sound like solos and not like scales. I think those are the two things that most people struggle with the most, are like what we're talking about right now, is trying to make a solo sound cohesive and natural and not just arpeggio, lick, pattern, arpeggio, that sort of thing. I think those are the two things that people tend to dwell on a lot.
Yeah, the mode thing, I think it was you, because I think one of the course, it was you. You were the one that, when you explained modes, I think you were the only one that actually I heard, and that made sense to me.
Sure.
Which was, because people think of modes as like this completely different animal, like it's completely unrelated to everything else. It's the same thing.
Yeah, right? And that's exactly it. Is now let's just say this: once you get what you're talking about, now being within that world of the modes, you can start trying to utilize the colors of those modes in different ways once you're inside. But like for me, when I was in college and I was first introduced to modes, because when I first went to college, I didn't understand anything about anything. I played by ear, and I didn't know any theory, and I didn't know how to read any notes. And my first year of college was really, really tough because I was just lost, and I don't remember how the miscommunication came up with modes, but for me, I didn't understand that they all stem from the major scale, and you're just emphasizing the 1 or the 2 or the 3 or the 4 on the surface, right? The basic fundamental of what modes are.
Right.
I didn't understand that. So when I all of a sudden learned that I had to learn Ionian and Dorian and Phrygian and Lydian, I was like, oh my God, I have a hard enough time trying to keep track of all the major scales. And yes, you can just move them up and down, although that makes it sound easier said than done. Like if you try and really solo well in B flat, it's harder than soloing in the key of G or something like that. You know what I mean? Because you just don't do it very often, and your eyes get accustomed to where those dots are.
Right.
We just do,
Yeah.
And I remember just being overwhelmed by the thought of modes, and then I don't remember how the came along, but all of a sudden I went, oh well, that's really easy. If I'm in that's why I always tell people Dorian is just a big. Again, I'm playing it down, but on the surface level, Dorian's just a big silly name for 2, right? If you're in the key of C major, but you're emphasizing the D minor chord in your song, in your whatever, if that's the primary chord, then you're in D Dorian. D Dorian doesn't mean you're in a completely different key. D Dorian is just saying, hey, you're in C major, but you're emphasizing the 2 chord. You're emphasizing the note D, you're emphasizing the chord D minor. So for me, what I would do is I would then, look at my fretboard as C major, because that's what I'm in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I would start trying to accentuate the elements, the arpeggios, whatever it is, of the D minor element. So I'm not just playing in C per se, right? Because the main chord is D minor. And again, this is something that people forget too, is all of these things that we're talking about are defined by the rhythm section, right? Not just you as a guitar player decide you're starting at the 10th fret, so now you're in Dorian. You're not. Whatever's happening with that rhythm section is defining the key that you're in, and you,
Right.
the soloist, are now framing up from whatever this thing is that we're soloing over. So the song is in D minor, right? Not your solo. You could be in C major, and if you move over to the second position, you're not in D minor. You're still in C major. You might be seeing D minor, but you're not in D minor. You're in C major.
Yeah, yeah. That's sort of what brought it into. So if you're playing, going back to what you were saying, if the song is using chords out of the C major scale, and you know how to play all the notes of the C major scale through the entire fretboard, and if the song starts in D minor, it's not like you're relearning all the notes. You already know them. It's what
That's
you
right.
emphasize.
That's right. And that's why you want to, like, in my opinion, it's nice to see, and again, I always forget the name of it, the thing that we used to have like in math class where they'd put those pieces.
Oh, overlays.
Oh yeah, a transparency, right?
That's
It's
fair.
like
Okay.
transparency. So being able to see whatever your primary scale is, C major is what we're talking about here, being able to see that wherever you can on the fretboard. Maybe you only see 1 position or 2 positions or all 7 positions, whatever, but you've got that laying there. And then you've got, on top of that, you've got like all the notes that are C, or all the notes that are D, or all the notes that are E, or whatever you need at that point in time are they're highlighted. So, for instance, if you were in D Dorian, you're seeing the C major scale laying there, but now all of a sudden the D and the F and the A, maybe, or maybe it's just D, whatever, is being highlighted. So we lay that one down, and now we can see that those notes are highlighted on top of this. Well, then we can take the arpeggio that we're looking for, the triad or whatever you want to call it, and maybe we see those as well. So now, and maybe we've got pentatonic sitting there too, right? So we can always shift in between these things by kind of seeing them all layered on top of each other. Where a lot of times when people learn how to play, they're like, okay, I need to learn the C major scale across the entire fretboard. And yes, you do, and it's very important to do that. But it's kind of like, what's the thing that you have to attack first? Should you do that for 6 months or a year and learn how to play that C major scale? Or should you only learn, maybe focus on a position or two, and then learn how to make music in those couple positions? So now if the right situation comes along, you can actually, maybe you don't know this whole thing, but what you've got, I mean, I always think of like BB King or somebody, right? And again, I'm never knocking BB King, but it's not like BB King was just shredding around the fretboard all the time. He had his locked in positions.
Right.
But what he did as good as anybody could ever do, better than anybody could do, in the way that he did it. So we have to make these choices on what it is that we really want to try and study, and why we're doing it. If it's just out of obsession, or because somebody told us we're supposed to be doing something, or is it because we can really see the fruitfulness of that practice, right? That zone that we're in, that I was talking about at the very beginning of this. Are we seeing the benefit of being able to look at this on top of this, or to add this lick, or to understand that chord progression a little bit more, maybe shut off or press pause on the jam track and go, what am I doing? Like, what are these chords? What are they? And how do I see some of these things on the fretboard, as opposed to just turning it on and then playing, which there's nothing wrong with. Maybe I want to turn it off for a little while and really analyze some of my options and my opportunities.
Right. Here's a question for you. This is from Mitch Heyman. He says, I'm reading a lot about theory and starting to understand it, like what makes a chord and circle of fifths. Having trouble applying to my playing. I still use my ear. So that's getting back to what we were talking about before.
Sure.
Relying on your ear. Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of times, and I mean, I'm guilty of this. Like the jam, like I was saying to you off air, like we do this thing in the community where we find a jam track and kind of pass it around, and everybody has a go at it. And usually, what I do, I'll be honest, I don't. I mean, I know the key, and then I just go right.
Sure.
And then it's like major, it's okay, this is a D major tonality, right? So you can still play all I mean, again, if you know the patterns, you're gonna, know where all the notes are. You're gonna emphasize different notes because major pentatonic is different notes that you're going to emphasize over the minor and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But you have a point to take a minute and kind of step back from that and look at what the chords are in the progression, and then maybe design or figure out or give yourself some more options, as opposed to just hit the play button and go, right.
And I would be willing to say to everybody here right now that that is actually profound, because we all are in situations sometimes where you just jam. You're not thinking, or you didn't have time to plan, or you don't feel like planning. We all do that. Don't get me wrong. Every player that you've ever known does that. But when you take the time to figure out what's happening and what you can and can't see, what your options are or maybe are not on the fretboard, are where you really start learning. So now you're not just thinking about how fast you can play or the next lick that you're going to learn. You start actually looking at that fretboard going, okay, I'm not making a connection here. I'm not seeing how to get from point A to point B with these chords that are happening here. This is something like, if you guys know who Tim Pierce is, he's a friend of mine. So
Oh
Tim and
yeah.
this is something that whenever we get together, we talk about this stuff a lot, because I think people tend to think, okay, in order to think that way on the fretboard, I have to have 5 years of theory, and you don't. You have to learn to visualize. This is why, like for me, I always tell people, learning how to visualize the caged chording system is absolutely important to your playing. What it lacks is the understanding of what the interval is that you're actually playing. But what it gives you is the opportunity to emphasize these notes that are interacting as the chord comes up. So if you have C coming up, you're seeing the scale, but you're also seeing an outline of that arpeggio, which is the
Right.
caged chord. And then if the next chord is F, well, if you're sitting right there, all of a sudden, if you can see that F, you can decide how you'd like to travel and when, and all those things into something that connects into that F. And it may not even require any change. Like the note that you're on might also be correlating with the chord that's coming up next. You see? So, and once you start, like, that was a life-changing thing for me about, I don't know when it was, maybe 15 years ago in my life, where I grew up playing a metal player. So for me, everything was fast and what I call linear or horizontal. Like it was all about, because in metal, when the solo comes up, it's all about electricity and power.
Yeah.
It's that's what you're doing, is you're expelling this energy at that moment in time. That's what it is. You're not really creating a melody per se most of the time. I mean, that's a generalization, but that's really the truth. Where if I'd grown up playing more, which I did get into when I later on, but more of like Steve Lukather from Toto or Neil Schon, or some of those guys that wound up becoming really a big deal for me as I got older. I never really thought about that before. And when I first started trying to learn how to play like that, it was tough, because in metal, in minor, you can fake your way pretty darn well. This is why we love minor pentatonic, because you can fake your way pretty well most of the time, because there really isn't any wrong notes to hit. But if you're playing over we can call it a pop chord progression, or a rock, pop rock style chord progression, where you've got major and minor chords, and there has to be some sort of melody interacting with that, it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to do than just ripping off over a power chord or a blues lick or something like that, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, and these guys, excuse me. And these guys, they've got, like, I mean, like you mentioned, Steve Lukather. There's a guy who's a super schooled musician who, when he's hearing a chord progression, he doesn't have one option. He's got like 100 options. His biggest issue is to edit himself and decide which way he wants to go.
Right. Well, and that right there is exactly it. Is you, everybody that is here right now, you have to figure out what makes you happy. You have to figure, because it would be nice to have more than one option, but you don't need 100 options, right? You just need to figure out what feels best to you. And, I remember when I used to be on the road with a band of, I played with for one of my favorite bands a long time ago. It was a cover band, but we were really good friends, and the musicality was high and the comedy was high, and it was a beautiful thing. But I remember I used to record the shows, and then we'd go back to the hotel after the shows, and I would listen to them, and the other guys would be like, you can't keep doing that because you're just going to keep beating yourself up. Because obviously when you perform live, you make mistakes. Like, it's funny because if you never do performing, you always see people, there'll be a Guns N' Roses concert or whoever it might be, and everybody's bashing somebody because they missed a note. Everybody does it. I don't care if it's Steve Vai, but it's all happening in real time when they're watching the show. They're not experiencing the mistakes. They're experiencing everything in real time. But if you go back and you start listening to all these, soundboard tapes, you start hearing things, and that can be very disheartening. Well, for me, I remember when the transition happened from I hate the way I play to I can tolerate listening to myself. I would never be one to sit and go, oh, I love the way I play. Yeah, I like the way I play. I'm very happy with the way I play, but I can always be better. But at least I'm at a place where I feel good.
Yeah.
Myself. And I think that's where everybody has to be is get to a place where I quit and James never, ever, ever, never miss a note. That's really good. But yeah, that's the thing is getting to a place where you feel good about what it is you're doing.
We got one question here from Brian Spalding. Welcome, Brian. He says, Guitar Hack, is Steve related at all to the guys from the band Haji's Kitchen?
No, I'm not. Haji's Kitchen. Who is in that again? Is Brett in there?
I have no idea. Hajis.
Yep, Haji's Kitchen. Yep.
Okay.
I'm looking up here to see who was in. Yeah, Scott was in there. I thought maybe Brett was in there, but Scott was in there. So Haji's, yeah. So Brett and Scott Stine, that spell their name, the last name the same way I do. They were both on Shrapnel label back in the early 80s. And I actually owned Brett's album. I didn't own Scott's, but I owned Brett's album. Now we're all friends. And we've actually talked about doing something together, but Scott and Brett are brothers. I am not related to them, although on social media, we're always calling each other brothers because people are always asking if we're related, and it's just easier for us to say yes. But cool. I'm not, as far as I know, I'm not related to them.
Vince Janella is saying, what a great guest. Thank you, Vince Janella. Yep. Happy to have Steve here on again. Okay, just catching up on any questions. Folks, if you've got questions for Steve, I am streaming to Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. So throw a lot of question marks in front, and I will be able to see those right away. I'm just scrolling down, making sure I'm not missing any questions. Yeah, make sure. Scott Crothers. There's a new name. Welcome to the channel. He's saying never listen to a recording of a gig. Yes.
Yep. Yeah,
I agree.
It can be good, but that's the thing. That's why when artists release, they record night after night after night. They don't release every night, unless you're as locked in as, again, X, Y, or Z band that's been playing forever and the songs are really dialed in. I mean, if you've been in a band and you know what that feels like when you rehearsed forever and then you play 3-4 nights a week all the time, you're pretty locked in. That doesn't mean you don't make mistakes and stuff, but even the mistakes sound pretty cool because everything's pretty tight.
Yeah, or they can hide them very, very well.
Right.
Brian's Guitars, Brian S. Guitars, Brian, how are you? Asks who or what got Steve started playing guitar?
When I was a kid, my parents were avid music listeners. My mom listened to a lot of old school country, a lot of doo-wop, things like that. I grew up with, At the Hop and Sha Na and all that kind of stuff from her. And then my dad, I got Led Zeppelin and Alice Cooper and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff. I used to come home from church on Sundays and my dad and I would go in my room and he would bring records in and we would just sit for a couple hours and just listen to music. And so I was always really into music. And but I remember going over to my cousin's house. They lived out of town, and I went over there, and we were going to listen to some records in his room, because that's what you did when you were a kid. You listened to records.
That's right.
Yep. And he had Love Gun by Kiss.
Ah,
And I went, yeah, and just, and a lot of people, if you're younger, you might not really recognize this, but there was something beautiful about holding a record and like looking at the artwork and turning it over, and in the sleeve, if there was anything written, and and it was just super cool. And I remember seeing that Love Gun album and going, oh my God, this is just the cool, and Almost Human and Kristen 16, and
I'm a huge Kiss fan. Like,
oh God, well, that was it for me. Yeah,
I play, and I love Les Pauls because Ace Frehley and Kiss.
Sure. Yeah. So that was it. I mean, I was pretty young at the time. I didn't start playing guitar right away, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And then I tried playing guitar very, very briefly when I was at the age of 9. I got a guitar from a different uncle that I had, and I got this Mel Bay book, and I could not make any, there was no teaching. I just had this book, and then I'm trying to look in it. I'm trying to learn like a C chord or a G chord or something. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I don't even know how I'm ever going to get from here to there. And I just quit. I played for maybe 2 weeks, and it just didn't work. And then on my 13th birthday, my parents actually bought me a red Hondo 2 Les Paul style guitar.
Cool.
And then that was it. I just played from then on.
Thunder Falcon's asking if you have any alternate picking tips for the picking hand.
Well, number one would be make sure that you have the right pick, right? And again, this is different for everybody. For me, I like a pick that's fairly hard, so it doesn't bend, right? So when I go to pick, the pick is going through the string, and there's no lag or anything like that. Have a fairly sharp point on the pick. The smoother the pick is, the more you're just going to get that swishy sound, and you're not going to get a percussive kind of attack. The second thing is to kind of defining where you're going to move from when you're speed picking. Whether you move from kind of the bicep or the elbow kind of in here, or whether you're moving from the wrist, or whether you're moving from the fingers. And depending on how you're doing it. So what I always tell people is, if you take that pick, and I choke way up on my guitar pick, so there's very little pick sticking out. Mm-hmm. And then what you do is you just try and start picking as slow as you need to. It doesn't have to be super slow. It's just whatever works. And you try never to leave the string. So when you pick down, try to not leave the string. And when you pick up, try to not leave the string. Like, don't, do this.
Right.
Pick through, try not to leave the string.
There you go. I think. Are you back? You froze me for a second.
Yeah, I saw that. And you just start trying to do it, and then you start trying to define where that articulation is coming from. Is it coming from your fingers, or from the wrist, or from the elbow, or whatever? And then you start trying to work that in. And then as you do that, you can start trying to kind of rotate. Decide if you need to turn down a little bit, or you need to turn, like this way or this way. Right. And you can start kind of trying to define what feels best. So don't do it with a metronome and all that kind of stuff. Just start by picking a string, your first string or your sixth string, if you're palm muting it or whatever it might be. And you just start trying to define the pick itself and where your muscles are coming from, where you're doing the action from, and make sure that you've got the right pick. And if you ever want to know what I mean by that, if that's kind of foreign to you, if you get a chance, find a really, really thin pick and try and do the same thing. And you're going to find that the thin pick just wants to sit on the string, right? Mm-hmm. Because it bends. So you have to find a way to get through that string comfortably. Now, it doesn't mean you need to use a bass pick or something like that. Maybe you do. I don't know. Everybody's different. But you just start trying to define what that is. And as you get more comfortable, then what you can do is take a metronome in and have the metronome line up with where you are. Like, as you start trying to do this, define what this is. As you start figuring out how that's working for you, instead of going, well, I'm supposed to start at 120, figure out what you're doing, right? Even if you need to just tap your foot, you're going ticka, 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 or whatever the speed is that you're doing, start trying to get the like if you have a tap tempo on your phone or something like that, you can start kind of defining where you are, and you can go, oh, okay, so I'm doing 138, or I'm doing 152, right. Or now you know what kind of where you are in this game, and you can start trying to figure out how to make yourself faster by being more, you have to learn to relax, and obviously a lot of practice certainly helps, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But that's a great place to start.
Here's a question. This is from Mitch Heyman. How important is it? He actually just mentioned the metronome. How important is it to use a metronome? I will at times, but it can confuse me.
Well, there's two parts to that. Number one, using a metronome or a drum machine or drum software or something is very important, because if your plan is to ever play in a band, you need to, the better you can, to the nth degree, lock into that drummer, the more gigs you're going to get. The more you're able to play very, 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 very solid, the more people want you. So it's not just the metronome itself. If you think about a metronome, it's really servicing two things. Number one, it's like a stopwatch when you're a sprinter. Like in high school, I was a sprinter, and then when I was in college, I became a long distance runner. But when you're a sprinter, you might be running a 40-yard dash or something, or a 20-yard dash. And the difference between your speed today and your speed yesterday might be a tenth, a hundredth of a second. Really, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only way you can know if you're getting better. Like if you just went out there and ran, you'd never know if you were getting any better unless somebody was actually timing you. And that's how you keep getting stronger and faster, is you keep trying to beat that time. So the metronome is good for us because it tells us what we can do, and it also tells us what we can't do. Now, that doesn't mean that everything should be done with a metronome. But the second part to that metronome thing is that it's giving you a groove. If you think about it less like a metronome and more like a drummer, it's giving you something that's telling you, this is what the groove is. Now, what can you do with this? So the metronome can be there for strength and speed and all that kind of stuff. And the metronome can also be there for development of that groove. Okay? So if you kind of think about it from both of those aspects, it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this a few times. Like, I mean, I've been playing in bands for a while, and I never play to the bass player. I only play to the drum. When talking about the rhythm, always play to the drummer. The only time I'll notice a bass player is if he hits a bum note. Right, as long as he's hitting the right notes, I'm locked in with the drummer. So yeah, I hear what you mean about the playing in the groove.
Well, and saying that is actually really profound as well, because again, I think we all spend so much time trying to move into the speed picking, soloing, sweeping world, and I get it. Again, I'm a hypocrite by saying this to a certain degree, but you get gigs by playing rhythm. You don't get a gig by standing there for 2.5 minutes and then the solo comes and you solo in front of an audience and then you stop again and stand around. Like that rhythm that you're playing, your understanding of the fretboard and your ability to absorb information quickly and figure out what you're going to do in a situation or the song or whatever it might be, and then being able to execute that, again, in my experience, is what gets you gigs. I think about the players that I play with, whether it's in bands or whether it's these remote collaborations I do. I know my go-to guys. That doesn't mean they're the only people I play with, but I know my go-to guys. So if I've got a project that I need to do and it requires talent, but it requires quick turnaround, I know the players that I'm going to go to for that, because like I'm doing this one now. We're doing We Were Born to Be Loved by King's X. I don't know if you know that song, but the end of it is just stupid groove. Just it's ridiculous. If you've never heard it before, when we get done, you should run out to YouTube or Spotify or whatever it is you have and listen to We Were Born to Be Loved by King's X and listen to the whole song, because they rock. But the last minute and a half of that song is insane. So that's something I'm working on. That's one of the songs that I started working on today. I'm doing as a remote collaboration with some other players. I have to get the players that I know can do that, not 6 months from now, right? But by next week, because I want the audio back next week.
Yeah.
Back next week so I can get it together and we can do this thing. And that becomes kind of the fun of the challenge, is finding songs where you go, okay, this is going to be kind of challenging. And then you dig your feet in and you just start trying to learn how to do this stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Fred M, welcome to the channel, is asking, who makes the best shredder guitars?
Well, I've always been an Ibanez guy. Ever since I bought my first Ibanez Gem when I was 17. I took my student loan money, because I graduated early and went to college early. So I took my student loan money and I bought a pink Ibanez gem because they came out in 87 or 88, right around, I don't remember which year it was. And so that's where my journey with Ibanez began. Again, being in Fargo, North Dakota, which is a relatively small community compared to a Chicago or a Minneapolis or something. You played what you bought, what they had, right? So, and I knew I wasn't, and again, no offense to anybody, but I wasn't a Fender guy and I wasn't a Les Paul guy. I'm 5'2". The Les Pauls were 30 pounds. And I mean, that's a quarter of my entire weight. So, those things, especially back in those days, so the Ibanez was shocking. It was, the fact it was pink and the neck was paper thin. And for me, that's where my whole thing began with Ibanez. But man, there's great Jacksons out there. There's Charvels out there. Now you've got, all these from Strandberg to Kiesel to all these different companies that make great fast guitars. But for me, 25 and a half inch neck, as thin as I could possibly get them. Usually I try and get 17 to 19 millimeter. Like,
wow.
Yeah. Like those gems that I play, like the one in that picture behind us, that one's a 17 to 19. The Prestiges by Ibanez, they've got some 17 to 19 millimeter. So and for some people that's too thin. Like you're a small guy, you're probably going to play that and go, feels like a toothpick,
Yeah, well, I can't. Yeah, you won't feel anything in the palm of your hand. Yeah, my problem, I get big palms and no fingers, so I need a round neck.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is just figuring out what feels best.
So. Yeah, exactly. Scott Carruthers, welcome to the channel, is asking, how do you get squeals? So I think he's talking pinch harmonics.
Yep. Okay. Well, they're actually far easier than you think they are. Obviously, the first thing is you want to make sure the easiest way to get a pinch harmonic is to have some distortion on your amp, right? Mm-hmm. And then what you do is, I don't have my stuff on, but what you do is when you go to pick, let me do this. Hold on. You're probably not going to be able to see this. But let me kind of try and show you. All right. So what you do is you take the pick, and when you go onto the string, okay, what you do is you turn so the thumb is touching the string. Okay. So that's what causes the pinch harmonic. It has nothing to do with this hand or anything like that. It has nothing to do with pinching, which is what we call a pinch harmonic. It really doesn't have to be anything like that. All you're going to do is you're going to turn up, and you don't have to turn way up, but you just turn up so the pick is touching the string. Actually, kind of the side of the pick is touching the string, but most importantly, my thumb is touching. So as I push that pick through, the last thing to touch that string is my thumb. That thumb is going to cause the harmonic. Now, you're not going to be able to hear it because I don't have it plugged in right now.
Yeah.
But just doing this, you're going to hear the harmonic.
Yeah, you don't even have to have the guitar plugged in.
Yeah, right. So as I push through, of course, I'm going to leave the string because I want it to continue vibrating. So I don't want to stop the string. But the last thing to touch that string is the flesh of my thumb. And that's how the harmonic is created. Now, if you move around a little bit, you can get different ones. And maybe on your guitar, you've got a more prominent one, between this pickup and this pickup, or this pickup and this pickup. I tend to find them right over my middle position pickup. And if you didn't have a middle position, just be kind of in the center. That's where I tend to find my most prominent ones. But, your guitar might find a different spot that works better. You know what I mean? But that's the trick is just pushing that through. And once you get used to it, all you have to do is, when I'm picking normal, I'm doing this. And when I want a harmonic, I just turn over and my harmonic is there. So as I'm playing something, whenever I want that, I just turn the pick over and there's my harmonic, or my pinch harmonic.
Another question here. This is from Brian Spalding again. What was the names of the bands that Steve played in throughout his career? I would like to listen to his music.
The ones you'd be able to find music for would be things like Avian. If you look up Avian Band, if you look up Avian on Spotify, you'll see a bunch of albums on there that I was a part of. Another one would be Grimstine, which was a project that Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper and I did. Steve did all the singing, all the vocal stuff, and then I wrote all the instrument parts. Those would be the two main ones that you'd find out there right now. Would be those. I've played on some other projects where I'm just a guitar player on somebody's album, but those are a little bit harder to find. But the easiest ones, both of those would be metal bands. So Grimstine, Grimmstine, and then Avian. And there's a couple of different Avians out there, but it's a power metal band, so you'd know it if you started hearing it.
Cool. I'm just scrolling down as you're talking. I'm looking for more questions. Okay, I don't see any more questions. So, folks, if you've got questions for Steve, just throw a bunch of question marks in front, and I will be able to check those out. By the way, I have links to Steve's YouTube channel and Steve Guitar Zoom website below. So make sure that you go check that out. I've purchased a few courses from Steve, and they have helped. As I said earlier, I'm not just blowing smoke here, but I think Steve's like the best guy out there, especially if you're coming at it and you're not, again, like I said earlier, you're not, already have a musical degree. You're coming at it like, I play a little guitar, or I have a fundamental knowledge or a basic knowledge, and he will explain it to you in such a way that you'll be able to run with it for sure.
I appreciate that.
Guitar Hack, what's the chair Steve has?
This is an 8K racing chair. So last year during COVID, yeah, that was last year, I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis. And so I was in just an insurmountable amount of pain between my legs and my back, between my upper legs and my back. And, sitting for long periods of time, I was just in a hurt bag. And what we did, my family, we live in North Dakota. We, during COVID, during just the beginning parts of COVID, we were already planning on taking a vacation down to Rapid City, South Dakota. Well, driving down there, we ran into some problems and whatever. And instead of it being a 6.5 hour drive, it wound up being a 9-hour drive. And I got there and my back was just, I was in a lot of pain. So I came back and found out I had osteoarthritis, blah, blah, blah. And I got this chair. So this is an 8K racing chair. And the reason I have this chair, as I said earlier, I'm 5'2". They sell these white ones, which are made for shorter people. Normally, the 8K racing ones are quite large chairs. But this one's actually a smaller size chair. White isn't my favorite color, and it sucks for video because, it skews the color correction of the videos, but you really can't see it very well. But had I been able to get black or something, I would have. But this size chair only comes in white, but it's pretty comfortable.
Mr. Rock says, "Hey Steve, what is the best thing to improve phrasing?"
I guess learning to listen and respond. One thing about phrasing is that you want to make sure that unless you're creating something like a motif, for instance, where it's something that is being repeated on some level, where you want the rhythm to be repeated or you want the notes to be repeated or the entire phrase to be repeated, something like that. I always try and think of how to make things different. So instead of playing the same rhythm, the same length of notes, that sort of thing, you try and change that up. And then my approach changes too. So I always call it dynamic contrast. So when I'm playing, instead of just playing notes, I tend to do a lot of bending and sliding into notes or out of notes, that sort of thing. I do a lot of intervallic playing, which we could call arpeggios, but I really just think of it as intervallic playing. Like instead of playing a scale upward, I play skipping notes here and there to make the intervals feel larger or sound larger. And again, being cognizant of those chords, because that's what phrasing really is, right? Is I'm trying to, as that chord's coming, I'm thinking about how to make these dynamic contrasts. For me, dynamic contrast would be low, high, fast, slow, high, low, loud, soft, play, don't play, pentatonic, diatonic.
Yeah.
Just anything you can think of that is an opposite of something else. You try and keep those things in mind, because if you go unless again you're trying to do something that's more motif centric, it gets old, right? So you're always trying to think about, instead of starting on the downbeat, start on the offbeat. or end early, right? So you're always trying to think about that ebb and flow to try and make your phrasing sound more interesting.
Yeah, I think the first thing you said is probably is the most important thing, which is listen. Don't just you know have the backing track just sort of in the background and you just going away. I mean, you got to play with the music, and pausing,
Oh,
breathing,
yeah, huge.
not just like
Well, that's when, like, speed, when we talk about shredding and things, some people love it, some people hate it. For me, it's a tool just like anything else. It can create this wonderful dynamic.
Mhm.
But if you're doing it all the time, there really isn't a dynamic. If you're never doing it, then there really isn't a dynamic. So it's nice to be able to, again, dynamic contrast, being able to do something that's, slow and melodic, and then you're back into something else. I like Neil Schon is definitive of that kind of playing. He's just a king of that sort of thing.
Yeah, Neil Sean's a beast. Fred M is asking Nick Bolcott or Vivian Campbell.
What about
him? I guess which you prefer, or who do you like better?
Oh gosh, I like them both. I mean, Nick, I love both their playing. They're very different from each other. Nick is very interesting because he and I are very close friends. Again, he was in Grim Reaper. This whole Grim Reaper thing is kind of crazy how that came about. But Nick is over at Sweetwater now, and when I grew up, that "See You in Hell" album by Grim Reaper was an iconic album for me because when I first started learning how to play, I took a few lessons. Again, this is when I was 13 now. I took a few lessons, but it just didn't really work out. But I did learn like a power chord, and I learned that I had the ability of being able to hear things and figure them out. And so I would take like "High and Dry" by Def Leppard and "Blizzard of Oz" by Ozzy, and "Back in Black" was another one. But certainly "See You in Hell," that album by Grim Reaper, was one where I would sit and learn all the songs by ear. And so I think from that perspective, Nick was a huge influence on me in terms of that. And Vivian's solos were always very quirky, like Warren DeMartini and all the Lynch, George Lynch and that sort of thing. I always enjoyed his playing. So I don't really like one more than the other. They're just very different from each other.
Here's a question from Addy Trobreezy, and welcome to the channel. Steve, is that a Steve Vai Signature Series guitar you're holding? I was at Sweetwater last week and saw one for $475, and it looked like a smoking deal.
Yeah, this one is from 1992, and this hasn't been on the market. They don't sell these anymore. This is called a 7 dBk, and this is an actual Ibanez gem. Usually the gems will run $1,500 to $2,000. The Pias are more than that. Where you might get into like a Gem Junior, or it might be kind of an RG model that looks somewhat similar to something like this. But these have been discontinued for, what is it, 20 years?
Yeah.
Longer than 20 years. Yeah. So they've been discontinued for a long time, but I own a number of these from back in the day. So, and they're all stocked with EMG pickups. That's the other thing that I love about the way I play is most certainly I was introduced to EMG back in the early to mid 90s, and they've been in most of my guitars ever since.
Oh, you're an EMG guy. Interesting. Yeah. Fred M, I like how interactive this channel is. Appreciate you being here, Fred M. Brian Spalding wants to jam with you.
Well, that would be fun. That would be fun. Hopefully someday, next year, hopefully Gearfest and everything will be back interactive with humans, and we can do that sort of thing. Usually I go out to Gearfest with one of the companies I work with. Usually lately it's been Hughes and Kettner, so I'm usually at the Hughes and Kettner booth hanging out, jamming with people, talking, doing whatever. And but this year, like I said, it's this weekend and it's all online, but I will be there online. I've got one or two workshops that I'm doing for them. So
Cool. Brian S. Is asking, what is the most recent piece of gear that Steve has acquired? Guitar, amp, pedal, etc.
The most recent piece of gear is the 5153 50-watt Stealth right back there on top of my Metza Barba cab. I love it a lot. I've always struggled with 5150s. There's elements about them that I've really liked, and then there's elements that I don't.
Yeah.
This version 3 here, this 50-watt stealth, is absolutely gorgeous. And it's not perfect, but it's a lot of fun. So, depending on what I'm doing, you can't see it, but over here I've got my Kemper sitting there. I've got my Hughes and Kettner over here. I use a lot of those sorts of things when I'm doing my recording. And like this summer, I'm doing the symphony orchestra thing in Fargo here. We're doing some Scorpion stuff. The Scorpions did this symphony orchestra thing. So they do all kinds of stuff, and then they're bringing me out to do these Scorpions tunes with them. And
Cool.
so sometimes when I do those shows, I'll use like the Kemper or something where maybe I'm not going to be as loud on stage, but I'll be loud through the PA. But
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing this summer. So, I could bring that 50-watt. I've got a bunch of different amps, but I've got a Metzebarba M0 100-watt, which is just stellar too. But my newest piece is that stealth over there.
Cool. I don't know if you want to answer this. Blackjack Guitar is asking, Steve, how old are you?
I am 50. I was born in 1970, so I'll be 51 next month.
I got about 4 years on you. Hugh Caldwell is asking, who are Steve's? Oh, this is gonna be hard to answer. But who are your 3 favorite guitar players?
That's hard to say. It depends on why, for different styles of music, for different things. I would probably say Andy Timmons would certainly be one. I'd probably say Steve Lukather would be one. And then I'd probably say, it's hard to say between like a John Petrucci or a Steve Vai or something like that. One of those players maybe. But I mean, there's so many that I'm not thinking up off the top of my head.
Yeah, exactly. You'll remember them later.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Thunder Falcon, welcome Thunder Falcon. He's asking, has Steve ever tried EMG retro active pickups?
I have. I sure have. I've got those in one of my Paul Reed Smiths. So I've got like a 5766 set, which is super cool. I've got a bunch of different ones. I tend to go with like an 81 and an 89, and the 89 is really an 85. That's you can coil tap, but I swear to God, the 89 doesn't sound like an 85. I think it sounds different. So I tend to run. I'll tell you my little secret weapon is that, and I've been doing this since the 90s. So Tommy, the endorsement that I've got with EMG, he was interested in how I do this too. But so what I do is I take my EMGs. I got an 81, 89 with an SA in the center. And then what I do is I've always pulled out the tone controls because I'd never used tone controls on my guitars. Again, I grew up as a metal guy. We don't really do a lot with tone controls. So what I did was I would always replace the tone control with an EMG SPC control. Now, the SPC is a presence control, but what I would use it for is, let's say I'm playing on stage and I've got a solo to do, and my guitar tone is just it's rocking, but it's not lead.
It's too dark.
It doesn't have enough gain, right?
Oh, okay.
So what I can do is with this SPC, if I turn it up, let's say I'm not near my board, I'm on the other side of the stage or something like that. If I turn that up, it gives me just a little bit of a bump in the amount of gain that's coming through there. So it makes it easier. Or let's say I'm playing, I'm going to fill in with a band, or I've got to get up with a band or do something, and the amp that I'm running through isn't giving me enough. Okay. I can use this as my sort of secret weapon to turn up when I need to, as opposed to having like a boost or something on the floor. I can do it right from the guitar itself. And so that's what I've always used that SPC control for. Cool. So now it's almost like a crutch, because if I play one of my guitars and it doesn't have that in there and I'm not getting enough, I always reach for that and go, oh crap, it's not there. Right. But that's what I use that for.
Well, I promised you wouldn't go longer than an hour, and we're at an hour. So,
we can go another 10 minutes if you want to.
All right, so let's go another 10. So, folks, if you've got questions for Steve, please throw them in. And while we're waiting for questions, I want to let everybody know that I have links to Steve's YouTube channel below. I have a link to the website for Guitar Zoom. Steve does some amazing courses. I've bought a few of them. They're real. I'm working on one right now. They're down there. Also, if you want to help support this channel, the Guitar Hack channel, we've got T-shirts, we've got hoodies, we've got mugs. That's all at the Teespring store. If you want hats, that's at the other store, which can't remember the name of, but it's directly below. There's also a PayPal down there. That would be much appreciated. And if you don't have me or follow me on Facebook, I have a Guitar Hack page, a Guitar Hack group, and there's also Instagram down there. So all of that, if you wouldn't mind checking out, that would be awesome. Fred M is saying Steve in caps is the best teacher around.
Thank you very much. I sure do appreciate that.
And Sandra's digging the stream. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Got 62 folks in here. And yeah, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Okay, I don't see... Practice is good, but practice with other players is better. Vince Janella, Guitar Hack, how long ago and how did you get into teaching online and doing courses? That's from Vince Janella.
Okay, let me see here. How long ago and how did you get into teaching online? I had my first guitar student when I was 17, and being from where I'm from, my teaching just sort of took off, and I taught as much as a person can humanly have for students. I was teaching. I was a professor at our local college, North Dakota State University, teaching music there. I was a Montessori instructor for 14 years, teaching music in the Montessori education system. And, I was in numerous bands at the same time and played in church and all kinds of different things. And I literally ran out of time. Like I was losing my mind with so many projects. I was the kind of person that never says no to any sort of musical opportunity. Right. And it just wound up getting me to the point where I was just about divorced because I was never home. I never saw my kids. And then I had this idea, and this would go back, and not that long ago. I mean, we're talking mid 2000s, somewhere around there, when the internet had already kind of taken off, but YouTube was still new, all that kind of stuff. It was somewhere around there. And I thought to myself, what if I could, instead of doing one-on-one lessons, every 30 minutes or whatever it was, what if I could teach like 20 people an hour or 30 people an hour online, all over the world? I could do something. And I actually hooked up with a company out of New York called lessonface.com. And I started teaching through them. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was teaching, I think 3 classes a week, and each class had 10, 20, 30 people in it. And, but the unfortunate part was I was adding it to everything else I was doing at the time, because I was trying to, I didn't know anything about online marketing. I didn't understand digital marketing, nothing. I was just trying to get my name out there and make some videos, which most of the really bad videos are no longer on YouTube, but just trying to make stuff. And that's when I connected with Dan, who owns Guitar Zoom. He had called me out of the blue. I was on break from my Montessori job, heading over to my NDSU job to then go to my private lesson job. And he called me. He's like, yeah, I'd like you to make some content for me at, some guitar courses. So I was doing that on top of everything else, only I was doing that at night. So I'd get home and I wouldn't sleep, and I'd make guitar courses for him. I'd stay up all night, make a guitar course, and then, or a section of guitar course, and then a section of guitar course. And then finally everything started kind of taking off. And once that started taking off, I quit everything that I was doing. Every job I had, I was terrified, but I quit everything, and in hopes that this was going to work. And it did. And ever since then, I am very, very, very good at saying no to things.
You learned your lesson. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm 50. I enjoy my free time. I enjoy time with my family, and I'm thankful for everything that I did. I'm blessed to have done everything I did. But I was driving myself crazy. So now I value my free time very much so.
No, that's great, man. Mitch Heyman, Guitar Hack, which course of Steve's would be good on how 7th, 9th, and 13th chords work?
I just came out with a new course called Music Theory Made Easy 2.0. And that might be a good one for you to learn how to utilize 7th and 9th and 13th chords.
There
I
you
think
go, man.
that's probably the best one.
Jeff K saying, hi, Hack and Steve. New sub to your channel. Love your Wicked Lick of the Day series. That's Jeff K.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. That was an early one too, doing Wicked Lick of the Day. That was a fun one. It's just, we were talking about this before too. It's just hard after a while when you commit yourself, like Wicked Lick of the Day was literally every day. So after a while, you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm going on vacation with my family. I can't do Wicked Lick. But I enjoy those, and I'm glad you enjoyed them as well.
Hetriani, he's saying, nothing but respect for Steve. Amazing player and fantastic teacher. If you could take lessons from anyone, who would you take a lesson from? There's a good question.
That is a good question. I probably would take a lesson from like Neil Schoen. I'd love to talk to him. I've talked to Andy Timmons before.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but Neil, I don't know Neil Schoen at all. I've never met him. I don't know anything about him, but I would love to pick his brain. You know what I used to bug me about guitar magazines? Because again, we grew up in the guitar magazine era of
Right.
Guitar Practicing Musician and all those things. I always wished that they would get inside the brain of some of these players as opposed to just talking about their latest gear and whatever. It was really, I always thought it'd be cool if you threw them a jam track and said, jam over it, and then tell me what you were thinking.
The process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And nobody ever did that. And I always wish that they had done that where, a teacher might break down the process, but I would have loved to heard, I'd love to sit with Neil Schoen and say, tell me how you think. Like if I gave you this to jam over, if I started playing something, tell me what you're thinking. Let me steal something from your brain,
Yeah, you make a good point too. I mean, there's so much on YouTube about gear, and more gear. Not enough on let's learn how to play the damn thing. You know what I mean?
That is popular right now. But that was the thing is I don't know if back in the day, back in the 80s and that if maybe players just didn't want to give away, their secrets. It's very possible, now, even Steve Vai's got a Patreon account now. So, I mean, everybody's willing to talk about whatever. But Neil Schoen, I don't know anything about him. I've never met him, but I would love to pick his brain for sure.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. I mean, you want to talk? I mean, just a melodic guitar player that is like on the money, and there's no note wasted, and dynamic, like everything. That guy's like everything in one package.
That's yeah.
You know?
Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites. He kind of, and there's so many. I have so many favorites, but I just love his, again, if I was using the term dynamic contrast, his ability of being able to, lull you with a great melody and then just, kick you in the pants with a shred lick. And I've just always loved the way that he plays.
Yeah, one of my favorite solos of all time is Stone in Love.
Oh, it's great.
I mean, the outro on that where he just goes on and on and on. And like, oh my God.
I know.
You could tell he thinks it and it's in his hands.
Yes.
There's no delay. It's just instant,
Well, and that's the thing is those guys, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, how do you think? Like, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about theory? Are you thinking about shapes? Are you thinking about like what's going on in your mind in real time that gets you to where you are? Because you can tell solo after solo that he is who he is. It's not like he's trying to be something he's not, because they all work and they all sound like Neil. So yeah.
All right. Well, we're at 10 minutes after 9. So I want to thank Steve for doing this and coming back on the channel. This was awesome. I think definitely gave out some good information. I hope everyone in the chat picked up something, because there was a lot of good information given out today. So thanks, Steve, for doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was nice hanging out with you, buddy.
Yeah, it was awesome. So hang tight for a second. So folks, this is the last of my regular Wednesday night shows. There will be more content coming, but it's not going to be necessarily every Wednesday, but there are more shows coming up. But it is summertime, so I'm going to be backing off on the Wednesday shows. But I want to thank everybody for checking out the show. Again, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. I want to thank Steve and wish everybody a good rest of your week and a good weekend.
All right, everybody, take care. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.